I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting for September 15th, 2011 to order. It is 7:10 p.m. And welcome members of the committee who are present, Sandy Fuller, our Finance Director, and people who are watching from home through Amherst Media. And I want to thank Amherst Media for making these meetings available through the public access government channel and on demand. The agenda tonight has essentially 8 topic items, or probably only 7, but 8 anyway. I'll say 8. And a lot of them interrelate, and that's going to make it difficult, but because they do tend to overlap. But I want to try and stick to the order of the agenda to the extent possible, because things that we talk about under 1 and 2, the budget results for FY11 and the news affecting budget, will come up again in later discussions undoubtedly. But if we may, let me go ahead and start by asking Sandy to see if he has any comments on the FY11 budget results, which were sent to members of the committee prior to the meeting and are available through the town website.
I do have copies of the report if anybody needs one.
I didn't see it.
All right. So what this report represents is the accountant's first take at closing our books. These results are unaudited at this point. They may change a little bit after the auditors come in and verify the numbers. And in fact, every year they do change a little bit, but basically this is a snapshot of all the revenue that's come in and all of our expenditures at the end of the close of FY11. I will go through some of the highlights of the report and then go into a little bit of the detail and just walk you through what I think are some key points, and then obviously take any questions people have. The bottom line is that we finished FY11 with an operating surplus of about $1.1 million. That is on a budget basis of $62.3 million. So in other words, our total surplus was about 1.8% of revenue. And that percentage is fairly consistent with what we've done over the last 5 years. We've been in 1.5% to 2% range. So I'd say our performance has been right in line with what we've been doing in the last few years. In fact, over the last 5 years, our average surplus has been $1,056,000. So we're good at doing the same thing over and over again. On the revenue side, that generated $634,000 worth of this surplus, about 52% of the overall returns. Some areas in the budget came in above our estimated revenues and some came in below. But overall, we ended up with $634,000 more in the general fund than we had estimated. And as you know, we start the budget year town meeting with a revenue estimate, and we try to be conservative. You don't want to run a revenue deficit overall. That is bad financial planning, and it gets you in trouble in the long run. You end up getting things like negative free cash if you do things like that. So overall, what we try to do is be slightly conservative. If we have new sources of revenue, we sometimes wait and don't count them all in the first year to make sure that they actually come in. This year, the sources that were most significant in terms of leading to the surplus Or fines and forfeitures. There's a $74,000 surplus there, and that really had to do with the new enforcement of the noise and I think open container bylaws that were passed last year. The police department has really taken a more active role in issuing tickets. Those tickets are $300 a piece, as opposed to arresting people. Both it's administratively more effective for the police time, and I think they get a better result. So I think in the first year we saw that as being a good source of revenue. Of course, with fines, over the long run, you always wonder if you're effective at finding people, then they will stop doing the bad behavior. So you can't always count on that as a source. Investment income was below what our estimates were, so we'll keep track of that for this coming year. But basically, in this investment climate, we put our cash in CDs and money markets and so forth, and our short-term cash, for example, is earning 0.02%. So it's not much. It's not much. Licenses and permits were down a little bit. That's really because building permits were down. And some of our, the other significant things, motor vehicle excise came in pretty healthily. I was a little surprised by that given the economy, but I think that's because we were conservative in estimating. I think the big things to note is the implementation of the meals tax and the motel tax. That started last year and was really kicked in this year. The meals tax gave us just a total of $311,000 worth of revenue, and the hotel motel was $183,000. We think that will continue to go up, particularly once the Lord Jeff opens up in October. We will see that continue to be a good source of revenue, and certainly from a policy point of view, it was a good decision of the town to adopt those. We had a couple of what I call one-time big revenue sources. One was a premium on the bonds that we sold last March. The premium is basically, it's sort of like reverse points on a mortgage. But essentially it's what the bond buyer will pay if the face value of the bond is really higher than what the bond is worth, so you end up getting a premium. We also had higher reimbursements from Medicaid this year. I think that was just a timing issue. All the other sources of revenue were pretty much consistent, and we had good collection rates, so we're pretty happy with that. On the expense side, we spent 99.2% of our budget. Again, that's fairly consistent with what we do. In other words, we fully budget for our expenses, and we tend to spend most of them. The biggest turnbacks we had were in two areas. One was in general government. There was $116,000 worth of turnback there. The biggest chunk of that was the $85,000 that came back from the reserve fund, because we were fortunate not to have many unexpected expenses during the year, and we only had to draw down the reserve fund by $15,000. So $85,000 came back from there. Public safety also had significant turnbacks of over $100,000. Again, that's because of vacancies, either because there had to be fire department personnel who were deployed overseas, or in the police department there were vacancies that were filled by May, but police tends to wait to get together enough people so they can get a class and send them off to the academy and so forth. The other things that are important about spending was that Public Works ended up slightly in the black because of our FEMA reimbursement for snow and ice, so that was important. In community services, we did have overspending on the veterans account, but we have changed the FY12 budget to try to take that into account, and we do get 75% of what we spend back from the state. That is the general fund. Some of the detail I went through is on the next page here. You can see the exact dollar numbers. And then the subsequent pages are the enterprise funds. So sewer fund had an operating surplus of $376,000. Water, $274,000. The solid waste fund had a revenue deficit, but ended up overall in the black because they just cut back on expenses during the year to make sure that they did not run a deficit. That continues to be a source of worry for us down the road, and we're going to have to keep a careful eye on that. Work with Guilford on what we can do to try to increase the revenue there. And transportation fund at a modest surplus. The rest of the report is just more granular detail of the revenue and expenses. I won't go through those, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I would just like to say one more thing, and that is I have the honor of presenting this report, but I really have to give credit to Sonia Aldrich, the comptroller, for putting the report together. She and her excellent staff do the work to make sure that our books are in good order. But for the fact that she is the staff liaison to the Community Preservation Committee that is meeting tonight at the same time, she would have been here to help present this. But as I say, she and her staff certainly deserve the bulk of the credit for the information you have here.
Let me just add one thing to the report and then open it up for questions. Most of you, if not all of you, received the mailings that go to town meeting, and you notice that this was mailed for the first time that we've done this to town meeting members, and it was a decision the select board made because they felt that it was of value to town meeting to be as fully informed as possible, as often as possible. I had met with town manager, the chair of the select board, and Mr. Puller, and we discussed the need to have some sort of cover memorandum to put it in perspective, and then I ended up writing it as Finance Committee Chair, and you may have seen that. It was a slightly extended version of those comments I made at the meeting of the select board where this same report was presented, and the major point that I made was that it's good that every year that we come in several percent below our expected break-even point, and because it's a reasonable budgeting percentage and better than coming out the other way. But in fact, when it comes to managing the finances of the community, that our total reserves, which are our free cash plus our stabilization fund, that total is not more significant, but an equally significant piece of information to consider. And that while we've had an average of about $1 million over the past 5 years, during that same period of time, the total reserve, stabilization plus free cash, has varied. It has not been a straight line, and it went from 4,018,000 essentially to 4,722,000, and in 2 of those years we had a negative on reserves, and in 3 of those years we had a positive on reserves, and that there are various things that happen that are additional to just the outcome of the close of the year that affect what ends up being the reserve balance at the end of any given year. And that given that and given the uncertainties going into the future years about state aid and what we can expect from the federal government and how the federal government is going to affect both the state and local revenues because of all of the deficit reduction discussions that are happening and actions that are happening in Washington, that I encourage the select board to not take this as good news and the license to vary from the programs that are currently funded, and that our best goal is to try and maintain what we have but not look to add to it, because despite what appears to be a very good result, and it is a very good result, that it was important to be cautious. I was encouraged to only write a one-page memorandum as a cover memo, and as a consequence, when I wrote that cover memo, I could not really go into that much specificity as I went into even in 5 minutes, which is all I spoke to the select board, because you can't do it in a single page. So I just wanted to add that piece to the report, and now Sandy had asked if there were questions. Bob had seemed to have one.
It did. Mine isn't a question. It was good. You articulated that very well. I think that's just the issue I was going to address. I just don't want there to be a perception that this is a slush fund that can be pillaged for the occasional requirement. It's got to be seen as just a part of good conservative budgeting. Does the term slush fund come from snow removal, or from what's the origin of that? It's an interesting idea.
I don't know.
But anyway, I just nothing more than the point that you made, that this is the result of conservative budgeting.
Questions about the numbers that we've seen since we've had this report, or other comments? Because if not, then we can go on to the second item.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just one thing when you were going through it that I want to point out, which is that we got $30,000 in FEMA money for snow and ice removal. If we hadn't gotten that, we would have had to use $30,000 from the reserve fund, and so we wouldn't have been turning back that much money to the
That's absolutely right.
to free cash, so we wouldn't have such a surplus. And it's that exact reason why we shouldn't try to budget so that we're spending every cent that we're going to take in.
Yeah, and in these amounts that we've had in the way of the revenue over expenses at the end of the year compared to budget have varied from a low of 794 to 21 in FY10 to the prior year was a high of 1,355,003. There are always individual factors that go into those numbers, and as we watch those from year to year, which is one of the things that this committee does, it is different pieces. One thing that I'll be curious about when making the budget projections in October is whether the Medicaid timing issue results in the need to say, well, maybe we got money early, and therefore next year we'll get money. We may have less than we would have otherwise projected in Medicaid money. I mean, there are always these pieces that are very individual year for year, and most of them, like the early payment from the state school board, school building authority for Wildwood several years ago for the roof. Or was it, I guess it was Crocker, whichever school it was. It was a one-time and unexpected event. and non-recurring. And I think we all need to recognize that. The next item was news affecting
What-
budget.
did you
And
say?
did
But
you-
I just had a clarification. A couple of-
Okay, go ahead.
You know, I have about, what, 1 week to ask them questions? Or? So I'll start now. Do we try to get 1.52% kind of a slack in the budget, just to be on the safe side? Is that what the goal is, or is that a reasonable number?
I think other people can probably speak better to the history because I've just been here for less than a year. But I would say that having done revenue estimates for municipalities for a long time, if you're within 1%, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah, sure.
Because there is a lot of variability. There are some accounts that are much more variable than others. Building permits is a very good example. It's been up and down a lot over the years. So I can tell you, as I've been working on the Amherst budget going forward, what we do is we look at previous years' actuals and try to come up with an estimate that is, follows a trend or maybe a long-term average, depending on what the account is. And then on the spending side, I think generally, we do tend to spend, 99% of what we budget, maybe a little bit more, 99.2, 99.8 some years. I don't think, you don't plan to turn up back a lot of surplus from your spending side unless at some point in the year you make a conscious decision to clamp down on spending.
Sure.
I think, there have been some people who have expressed a philosophy that because we have had this sort of regular 1 to 2%, which is usually due to revenues, but it's been in the positive side that we should be a little bit more willing to up our spending planning. And my comments that I made to the select board that I previously reported were in part a response to that. I don't think that Mr. Musanti, when he's been finance director, as he has been for the last years, and helped us put budgets together, made a deliberate effort to try and have a surplus. I do think that he tried to be very reasonable and cautious about revenue estimates because he didn't want to risk unduly coming out the other way. Now, I know that as Sandy puts together, works with us to put together the budget for next year, that he'll have to, come to his own philosophy, and I'm sure consult with John, who hasn't disappeared from the scene by any means, and get John's wisdom. But it's not been something that has been deliberately done. But on the other hand, we haven't wanted to end up in the negative, and it's hard to come out exactly even. So that's, I think, where we ended up being. Anything else?
It's pretty remarkable that there are so many moving parts in this when it comes to clothes.
Yes.
This is all accrual accounting, right? It's not cash.
This is cash accounting.
Is it?
Yeah, for this. When the auditors, there are other reports that are more like accrual accounting, but this is basically cash accounting.
So let's go into news affecting budget, and I noticed there were at least two things we had specifically ask for to be included, and then you may have others.
Yeah, the first item is this one-time state aid. There was unrestricted state aid was cut by $65 million in the FY12 budget. But a last-minute amendment went through that said if the state ran a surplus at the end of the year, that up to $65 million could go back to cities and towns. And I was just talking to the MMA the other day. They confirmed that that, in fact, is going to happen. We should know by the end of this month exactly what the number is. I think it's going to be about $500,000 because that was the size of the cut that we took when they cut the $65 million. So I can report that that's still on track, but we haven't gotten any more official word of those numbers.
And I guess the other thing I should say, and you've heard the same thing, is that I saw Senator Rosenberg in July, and the Senator told me very clearly, do not ever count on this money coming back again. Assume this is one-time money and don't treat it as anything other than one-time money. Do not build any recurring programs built upon assumptions of this money. Senator Rosenberg is a pretty good budgeter, so I've taken his advice to me very seriously.
Exactly. The other item is funding for war memorial renovations. As you know, town meeting expressed a very strong interest in reopening the War Memorial Pool and voted another $65,250 into the FY12 budget to try to get the pool open last summer. Because of the state of the pool, we weren't able to open it, although there was another indoor swimming program at the middle school. But there's still about $50,000 left over from that original appropriation. We have applied to the park grant system for a grant to do a full-scale renovation of the pool and some minor work on the adjacent pool building. That total cost of that work and the total grant application is $297,600. Of which the state would pay 70%. So the town match would be about $89,000. As I said, we have already $50,000 set aside. We learned from the park system recently that we would have to appropriate the entire amount of the grant up front. So we would have to identify a source such as free cash, for the entire amount, and then get reimbursed. And given the timeline on this, I think there's a good chance that we would get a lot of it back within the fiscal year, so we'd end up back in our free cash by the end of the year. That is the state of that grant. We also applied, by the way, for a grant to do some work around Puffer's Pond. Both of these are going to go to the JCPC, but that was a 2-year design-build grant. And we also just learned from the park grant program that even though it's a 2-year grant, we have to make an appropriation for all of it up front. That is a $370,000 expense, of which the town share would be $111,000. That's obviously something that we need to discuss. JCPC needs to discuss it from a programmatic point of view, and finance needs to discuss it when we bring it forward as a formal presentation as to the need and merit of the program. But those are the two big items that are on the docket for possible expenditure. So I wanted to give you a heads up about them now.
Okay. let's follow up to see if there are any questions about either of those grants or the work to get.
These are for fall town meeting?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Will the article be written such that if we appropriate the total amount but will not expend it if we don't get the grant? Can we do that?
Yeah, I think that, actually, that's an interesting question. I assume that if town, I don't know how, I assume if you appropriate something and under one set of assumptions and those assumptions don't come true, you just don't go forward with the project. And then you can ask town meeting to rescind it in the spring or something like that. We shouldn't, by town meeting, we will know whether we have the grant. If we don't get the grant, obviously, we will then have to make some decisions as to whether we want to do everything that's in the project scope, and I think that is part of what the JCPC conversation will be about. We'll have a line item budget for you at that point, and certainly finance too, to get your recommendations in the eventuality that we don't get the full grant.
When would you,
Just a quick follow-up on that.
yeah, go ahead.
So the town needs to appropriate 290 plus 370?
Well, they're two separate items, so if we do both, then yes.
Why do you say if?
Well, it could be that we decide not to do the Puffer's Pond project, for example, because it's too expensive, or we didn't really think we were going to have to come up with all that money this year, so we'll withdraw the grant from the state. And or let's say the state doesn't give us the grant, then we could withdraw the article before it even gets to town meeting, or recommend no action on the article at town meeting if we know for sure that we're not going to get the grant money.
So it's just a cash flow problem. If we get the grant, we appropriate the entire amount,
Yes,
but we get reimbursed for whatever we get reimbursed for.
70%.
And there is no uncertainty about that.
Yeah, once we get the grant, we'll get the 70%. That's
Okay.
correct.
All right.
We should probably take this up at a subsequent meeting when we may have more information available to inform the discussion. I think that a big question that Amherst as a community in the town meeting as its legislative body is going to have to come up with is, if the park grant doesn't come through, what's the intent about War Memorial Pool? Will it fund renovations, all of these renovations, part of these renovations, and there are consequences to all of those decisions. It is a capital and one-time expenditure. JCPC is going to have to also provide advice on that, and I don't know when JCPC will be meeting to provide
Yes,
format advice.
they're meeting on the 4th. Excuse me, the 6th
6th.
of October.
Okay, that's helpful to know. The select board has to sign the warrant around, it's early October, I can't remember the exact date. And once the select board has signed the warrant, then a warrant article will be there or not, and we'll have to respond to it. We will have meetings in October, on October 13 and October 20. On one of those nights, we will get a report from JCPC on all of the capital items, because those aren't the only ones, and then we'll have to discuss and decide if the Finance Committee has a position and what the position is. But I think that's the sequence. And select board would, I don't know if they would, do we know when we'll know on the park grant?
I think that we should know by early October.
But but it may not be before the select board has to put the warrant, sign the warrant.
Yeah, I forget when I don't.
It's around October 6th, roughly.
Yeah, that's a Thursday.
Yeah.
6th.
So maybe it's the 3rd.
Yeah, so I doubt that we will know by the 3rd, for
Yeah.
sure.
So they may be putting this on the warrant, putting something on the warrant. Not know. That would be likely. Okay, I don't have anything more that I can add. I have other questions at this point on any of these items. Is there anything else that you have in the news affecting budget category?
Nothing solid. You know, I've been talking to a lot of people lately about their estimates, and I talked to the MMA about their estimates of the FY13 budget and what state aid might look like. But I think maybe I'll say that for October 13th.
Sounds like a plan. Anything else? Okay, then we can go on to the third agenda item, and two members of the subcommittee were here. We had a subcommittee that was put together. We had 3 items that we intended to work on as a full finance committee. And they were interrelated, and the reserve policy on reserves and the policy on OPEB have some strong relations. And the third one was question about whether we should have a policy about enterprise funds and enterprise fund balances, which is currently does not exist. And so there was that some bundle of items, and we asked the subcommittee that met twice over the summer and did a lot of thinking on this and has reported back to us to look at what are reasonable options to consider for these agenda items, and then also to see if there were any that were particular things that the committee should be considering. It was to help form discussion for the committee as a whole. So I guess I'll ask either Kay or Bob to report back as the 2 members of the subcommittee were present.
Well, we slaved away.
Really noted and appreciated.
I think we have a summary proposal, right? And we will need to discuss it, I think, in detail when we get Doug back. Especially, he spoke very articulately about the various options that we have before us. I think if I were to put a summation on it, and Kay, back me up on this, we see this year as a very good year to make a big down payment on the OPEB. And as a subcommittee, we came up with a $500,000 figure as something that we wanted to discuss with the larger committee as a way to get a jump start on this trust fund. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that's where we left it.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I would add is that we didn't really discuss the enterprise funds policy at all. We had the OPEB issue seemed so huge that's what we concentrated on. Do you have more to say?
No, that's it.
I've done some additional thinking here and talking to Sandy a bit, and I think he's put into this memo some of the concerns that he raised and that hadn't occurred to me about having an OPEB trust fund, which the town now has. But the schools don't have one, and the enterprise funds don't. So if we're putting a large sum of money into the town's OPEB trust fund, that's just starting to fund the town's obligation and not the school's obligation. And the town is the regional school district. We're going to have to pay that eventually. So I'm feeling less certain than I was at the end of our subcommittee meeting, because there seem to be ramifications to it. We were looking at examples from what the town of Brookline has done. They had a committee that did an extensive study and a report, and it seemed very good guidance, except they're all one entity. And Brookline is just one entity, so they establish a fund, they start funding it. For us, it's a little a lot more complicated.
In fact, one of the reasons I asked Kay Bogart to come here tonight is to help us answer any questions or maybe give a little explanation of where all the money is for retiree health and our health insurance. Because, Kay, why don't you come on up? Just to give a very short explanation of how we provide health insurance to our actives and retirees, and how that relates to OPEB. And then I've got a few more comments that I'd like to make. So can you just give the nutshell version?
For those of you that haven't been around or on the finance committee for a long time, I'll just briefly go back to in 1986, we established a trust fund to self-insure our health insurance. And that trust fund covers what have been considered as 4 different entities. The town of Pelham, the elementary school, the Amherst elementary schools, the Amherst Pelham Regional School District, and the town of Amherst municipal employees. A few years ago, maybe actually 10 now, when I think back on it, the trust had always been in place, but we finally did a trust agreement that was signed off by all 4 entities. So we have an official trust agreement that basically says that we're going to provide health insurance, that the money charged for that is going to go into a trust fund, and the expenses, etc., will be paid out of that trust fund. It's roughly pretty much almost equal that each entity has, except Pelham has about 1/3 of the membership in the trust fund. You know, the Pelham, I think, has maybe 3% or something like that. It's a fairly small number that is theirs, but that's the way we've chose to fund health insurance. Some of you might remember our bleak years where we had a deficit and we had a surcharge that the employers had to pay and the employees had to pay. So the employee share and the employer share goes into the trust fund. When you start talking about OPEB, you're really only talking about the employer share that you're dealing with, and it would be a separate trust fund. You wouldn't put the money in the health claims trust fund.
And just to remind us how we provide health insurance to the various retirees.
The retirees are on the same basis as active employees. We pay the same contribution rate for our retirees. We've made a very concerted effort. You might have heard with the legislation that took place earlier this year about Medicare and putting all of your employees or your retirees into Medicare when they were 65, if they were eligible. And we've made a very concerted effort over the years to do that, even though we hadn't adopted what was called Section 18 of the law. As a consequence, pretty much everybody, I think we have like 6 people in the entire group that we're going to have to comply with the new change in the law and enroll them in Medicare. We're responsible for paying the penalty, but you look at the whole thing as the retirees are basically paying what they were paying as an active employee until they get to Medicare eligibility, and then they pay a little bit less than they were paying as a regular under 65 retiree.
So the town retirees are paid for by the town. The
Yes.
elementary schools,
It's in there, but in the elementary school
it's in their
budget.
budget. If they're not teachers, if they are teachers, retired teachers, they're in a state retirement system, but we get assessed for that. The same thing for the regional schools. And then the Pelham people are just off.
That 3% is
Right.
up. But they operate in the same manner that we do.
So, one of the things that I did, thank you, Kay. And if people have other questions, Kay is the town expert on benefits and she'd be happy to answer questions. She talked about the fact that there are 4 entities. And one of the things I did after we had our last meeting is I kept, if you stare at numbers long enough, you go crazy or you learn something. So maybe I did both. But one of the things I realized is that there are 4 entities, but there are 3 studies that were done last year. Or there was one for the regional schools, one for the town of Pelham, and one for the town of Amherst and Amherst Elementary Schools together. So it melded those 2 entities into one study, which at the time that I was talking to the subcommittee, I hadn't really focused on that. But it has some implications for our thinking, right? And certainly my thinking about things. In that our OPEB liability is both smaller and bigger than we talked about. It's smaller in the sense that if you just look at the town, just the town retirees, they make up about half of that $50 million liability that we talked about in the subcommittee. $26 million of that is attributable to town retirees. And so if the town just went off on its own and didn't do anything with putting money toward the school side, we'd have, a much smaller, about half the size of the problem, I think.
I'm sorry, just the 50 is with the 4% discount rate?
That's with the 7%, and that's the numbers that I showed you.
Okay.
The 74 million if we use
Is the 4% discount rate?
That's right. So, just to explain that, depending on whether you're setting money aside in an OPEB fund, you get to basically take credit for what you're going to earn on that fund. If you are putting money aside, you can you can discount your liability at a higher rate, and in the study used a 7% discount rate. If you're not putting money aside, for reasons that completely escape me, you can use a 4.25% as opposed to a 0% discount rate. But those are actuaries, and there's only so much I can.
Either way, the number is a pretty large number.
Either way, the number is very large, exactly. So, on the one hand, it's a smaller problem. On the other hand, if you really think about it, and I think Kay alluded to this a little bit before, the town of Amherst problem is a problem of money that extends both to the town and to the elementary schools and to the regional school district. If you add up the total liabilities for all those 3 entities and still just using the 7% discount rate, you have a present liability for Amherst Elementary, and Amherst's share of the region. You're back up to $74 million. And so there's some implications to that. One is, if that's the nut we're trying to crack, it's going to take longer than we said the other day to crack it, because it's a lot more money. There's really basically only one source of money for the region, and that's us. And for the elementary school too. if we, and these liabilities are gonna keep showing up on our books if they're not funded on their side. So we can try to tackle some of the things that we control directly, but at the end of the day, we're part of a bigger whole that, and so it gets me thinking about how we talk to the schools about their participation in doing some kind of funding. When the school study was done, it included, for example, all of the retired teachers on the regional and elementary school system who are in the GIC, because that's where the teachers are now. There's been some talk on the school side about bringing those people back in onto the town plans, because it would actually save money for reasons that Kay can explain. I think basically because, well, actually, Kay, why does it save money?
Because the GIC has 10 or 12 plans, I'm not exactly sure. But what ends up happening is that 95% of our retirees, and that's a combined region and elementary and Pelham, 95% of those retirees go on the state indemnity plan with catastrophic illness coverage, which is the most expensive plan. I think that it's over $2,000 a month for a family plan as of now. I don't have the exact figures in my head. So if you make the assumption, when we looked at this a few years ago, it was, I believe, around 150,000 for the region and 140,000 or something for elementary per year savings. There are two factors that come into play. One is the Medicare, the changes. Actually, our group plan is a little bit less than the GIC plan for a monthly premium on that. And we still reimburse for the employee, the retiree share of the Medicare Part B premium. So it would end up saving those folks some money on a monthly basis, not a lot, but some. But the big savings would be in that, you know, looking at $1,500 total monthly premium for a family membership versus a $2,000 a month premium, or, you know, whatever the difference is now between the two, is the primary difference. And because they're paying 10 or 15% of that higher premium, what the individual members would be paying would not be very different. So their actual out-of-pocket expenses for premiums would be pretty comparable. It would just be a matter of, we have a different plan structure than anytime you have an indemnity plan, it's going to cost a considerable amount of money.
Do they get the same coverage?
One would argue that our coverage is slightly better, and that may change in the future with the new healthcare legislation. The state currently has a number of deductibles and co-payments that we don't presently have on our plans. But I don't know how familiar you are with the healthcare reform for municipalities, but basically what that is resulting in is there's a benchmark plan that the state's encouraging everyone to move towards. So we'll be looking at that in the coming months, and there'll have to be some decisions made as to what the group wants to do or what the different entities want to do.
Okay.
I think the reason so many retired people go for the indemnity plan is it gives you a great deal more flexibility, which is why it's so expensive, in choice of physician and coverage out of the area. And that's something that some people may have a hard time giving up. On the other hand, it may be something that the GIC isn't going to be able to afford to continue for very long, the state, because the state is having to pay that same high premium for retired state employees.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the question if we have many people who need to consider as we think about a policy. Most of them are retirees, and retirees who choose to move away from Massachusetts or Western Massachusetts are in a different position. I assume that it makes it much harder for them to be covered under some of our plans, which are HMO type plans.
We currently offer 2 PPO plans, which basically you can go anywhere, and choose whoever you want for services, and those are the plans that the folks that are retired and live out of state really have to enroll in, because they wouldn't be able to get the services on the HMO plans. So theoretically, you need to be in the New England area to participate in an HMO plan. I would say that in this geographical New England area, that Blue Cross Blue Shield and Harvard Pilgrim, which are the 2 health plans that we carry, probably have the broadest coverage of any health plan. Blue Cross is a national plan, even though it's structured to be Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. It's still part of this larger network. And Harvard Pilgrim has also made an effort to have a larger national network. They're part of an alliance of other plans. So we do have retirees that live in various parts of the country that are enrolled in Harvard Pilgrim or Blue Cross Blue Shield, but they're always enrolled in the PPO plan because that's how they can get services. So it's not unlike the indemnity plan. There's still a network when you deal with a PPO plan, but if you're out of the network area, you're treated like you're in network.
Okay.
I keep getting a headache when I think about it. Because we're incurring liability for retired teachers who are in GIC plans right now. And they're accounted for in the actuarial study for the town, right? But not for the regional school district.
No, they are for the region too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
in there too.
Yeah, but that's one of the things I verified this last week.
Okay. So, if we could establish one OPEB trust fund, that would cover everybody.
That's right.
And that's where we need the school committee to kind of go
Yeah.
along.
We need everybody to agree to that, because they need to also adopt it.
That's right, and I mean, there's simple things like trying to divvy up this Medicare D money that I alluded to in the memo, where right now it's easy enough for us to figure out what part of that goes to the town, what part to the region, what part to the elementary school, what part to Pelham, and we have a place to put it. If we put it all in a healthcare trust fund that pays the bills day to day, that's fine because everybody has a share of that. But if we put the Amherst part into the Amherst OPEB fund and the Pelham part into, I understand Pelham is moving forward with their own OPEB fund, then we have the school part that we don't have any place to put.
Right.
And again, as I said in the memo, it's sort of an accounting issue, but it really goes fundamentally to the issue of when money is coming in, whether it's a one-time source, we get a bonanza for something, whose money is it going to be and how are we going to divvy it up between those entities? If we start putting money aside for I think one of the things that John and I talked about, I think was a little bit of a concern of his, was if we start putting money aside on the town side, is that going to take away from town program? And yet, the same amount of money then goes to the schools, and we're not dealing with that liability. And I think that's a worry of his, and something that I think we need to talk about, and I think ultimately need to talk about with the school committees.
I mean, it really becomes a fairness issue in some sense. So it's not just an accounting issue, it's that
Absolutely.
you've got a uneven offset of a liability with the town, which indirectly benefits the schools, I guess, is what you were describing. And then you also have the return calculation problem, which could be an absolute nightmare if they end up putting their OPEB together 6.5 months later than ours. And so that is a legacy that goes on and on forever. You know, so it seems like there's one, you know, approach, which is to try to get the school committee to consider a consolidation of the OPEB.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
If ideally, if we could structure it the ideal way, it seems to me right now, my headache's clearing up, is you have one overall OPEB fund and you put a certain amount into it from your anticipated, won't work very well.
Yeah.
From, I was going to say from the overall revenue for the schools, the town, and the regional school district. The only problem is, what do you count as revenue? I mean, the schools get a good deal of revenue that doesn't come from the taxpayers, so.
Yeah, and we're also dealing with taxpayers with 4 towns, not 1.
Right. Right, but yeah, that's the other question, because they're, if Pelham establishes an OPEB fund, fine, but Leverett Shutesbury haven't, as far as I know.
Yeah. This is an item that I'm trying to get the chairs of the 4 finance committees of the 4 towns together sometime this fall. We did that be amongst the agenda items I'd like to talk about, because I'm not sure I understand it. How it works.
Well, I know I don't completely understand it, so.
Well, let's hope we can clear it up for me. Okay.
You know, listening to the question of whether or not to have one OPEB trust fund that was set up in the same manner as the health claims trust fund. If it's permissible, I don't know if it's permissible under the law, to be honest with you. But each entity, the region, the Pelham, Amherst, and Elementary, budgets a health insurance appropriation. And so theoretically, you could bill those appropriations on a monthly basis if your trust fund was set up with the same 4 entities. You know, I don't, off the top of my head, see any legalities that would require you to have legislation because you're appropriating the money for health insurance. And you know, that might be the way to kind of solve the problem if you had X number of dollars for a family premium, X number of dollars for an individual premium on that was just paid on a monthly basis out of your appropriation.
A trust fund auto pay, kind of.
Right, and I mean, right now, everything that's paid goes into the health trust fund. But as I alluded to earlier, we had a surcharge a few years ago. And so this could be treated the same as a surcharge, but you could only have it a surcharge on the employers. You couldn't have it on the employee share of it. So it's just a thought that you might want to consider. I know it's not the way everybody's been thinking.
But it's a new idea. That's an interesting idea.
That, you know, because Amherst set up its own OPEB fund a couple of years ago, Pelham has worked to do the same thing, but it may be that it's, and then you're not worrying about whether Leverett and Shutesbury are going to contribute because it's coming from the region on a regular basis.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's also possible that we have an Amherst trust fund that covers the elementary school, the town, and the enterprise funds, each contributing some share. We would have to account, you know, as I said in the memo, it might be that we hit up the enterprise funds for their full share right away, get them fully funded within a few years. On an accounting basis, keep that segregated, but it's all part of one fund. That's permissible, and other places have done things like that. Whether we keep the, whether we put the region in that single fund, I don't know yet whether that's the right thing to do, because it adds a whole nother level of complication. And it is something that I think, I certainly would like to get, we're gonna have another actuarial study at the end of this year. And I think as part of that study, I think we would like to have some advice about how we structure whatever we're doing. Not to say that we have to wait until we get that study back before we do anything, but I do think, I've talked to our actuary, and on an informal basis, he's certainly willing to give some advice, but I think it would be worth it to get some real professional advice on how we might structure these funds and do the accounting for them. And do things like how, if we're hitting up different funds at different rates, how's that going to work? Janice, did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess I was wondering, how do we start discussion with the schools about joining? I mean, they all have a liability also, and these other towns will have a liability, so who will start that conversation?
I can tell you on the staff basis, we've certainly been talking to each other. I know that Rob Detweiler has tried to get the school committee to take an interest in this issue, and he's still trying. So I think that's going to continue at that level, but I also think from the level of the elected officials, having the finance committee talk with the school committee, whatever way you think is best, I think is an appropriate way to keep that ball rolling. And I think it has to be a conversation both at the staff and the elected official level, or appointed official level, in case of the school finance committee.
Just getting back to Kay's idea about the auto pay concept, that is there such a thing, and this is where I don't understand the town meeting legislative process, as mandating a new line item for OPEB amortization? So instead of creating a fund, we set some kind of benchmark according to an amortization schedule that you figure out for both school and town. And then we suggest in our budgets this amortization schedule each year. A number goes in automatically into the town budget, into the regional budget, and grammar school budget, that amortizes this OPEB, and it becomes part of the legislative budgeting process. And for it to be overturned would take town meeting to reject that vote and then suggest another budget, which is a budget without that line item.
It's a complicated issue because it's my understanding, and I would have to consult both town council and the moderator to get a firm understanding of it, but it's my understanding that under most circumstances, one town meeting cannot bind a future town meeting. And now there are circumstances where that in effect does happen. If you issue a bond, you're committing to the repayment of the bond, or the town that future town meeting has to decide to default, which is an unlikely decision for them to make. But can you set up something that doesn't ultimately require a year for your decision? I don't know that it would be easy to do that. I thought about that when I saw the recommendation that was built into the minutes, that you start with 100,000 and add 100,000 so that until you get up to $2.1 million, and so that you're trying to create the will of future town meetings to make $2.1 million regular annual contribution without thinking about it. But I'm not sure that any future town meeting in a budget crisis year wouldn't have the right to say, gosh, that's important, but operating the elementary schools and the police department this year is more important, and being able to make that decision. I don't know how you could get around that.
No, I think you can just do it 1 year at a time.
Yeah, it would be an annual vote. I mean, it would be just like voting part of the budget, but I guess I'm not sure how we get them to even put it in the budget if they weren't so inclined.
I don't think you can put it in their budget. There could be an appropriation like there is for the retirement system.
I mean, health system.
Well, every year we pay money for pensions to the Hampshire County Retirement System. That's a separate article. And you can have a separate OPEB article. It wouldn't flow through the school budgets. It's a different political issue of whether the schools would go into town meeting and say, I mean, you'd have to have everybody's support for it. Just creating the article in and of itself obviously doesn't do the trick. And in fact, I think if you look at some of the articles in other communities, they just do have a separate OPEB funding article, warrant article.
Okay.
The easiest thing for the town would be if the state set up an OPEB fund and collected the money from the cities and towns based on some kind of schedule. People wouldn't like that because it would remove local control, but then if you had this trust fund, it would assess the town as we're assessed the pension liabilities.
Right.
But I don't know if there's ever been any move in that direction. That might be more complicated to do.
I think politically it's a non-starter. I mean, I was reading I spent a lot of time on other towns' websites, and I was reading Winchester's OPEB policy, which was, we steadfastly refuse to have an OPEB policy. I mean, they're very explicit about it. And they're a AAA rated, wealthy community. So I think the odds politically that you're going to get that to happen. Now, I did look into, I don't want to get off this topic, but it's sort of related. I did look into this issue of where we put the money, and when I talked to the committee, in fact, I even wrote this memo, it was before I talked to staff at PRIM, which is the fund that manages the state pension system. And as I reported to the subcommittee, there is an option of putting our money into a state fund as opposed to having our treasurer look into it. But nobody knew anything about it, so I finally tracked down a staffer. And it turns out that PRIM recently got an IRS ruling that said that they could, in fact, take this money and that they can mingle it with their other investments. So they just take it as a big pool and then account for it. And they are in the midst of transferring some of their money from one pool into this other pool so they can comply with this IRS ruling. And the long and the short of it is that sometime later this fall, they may actually be open for business to take town money. Which makes me feel better about this, because if you look at the legislation, it doesn't talk about PRIM, it talks about some other obscure board that you never heard of that is supposed to be able to take OPEB money, and it's the board that handles the tobacco money for the state. Anyway, that's a long, complicated story, but PRIM is and the PRIM fund is a very legitimate place for a lot of communities put their pension money in there and don't worry with doing their own pension management.
You should do what the letters stand for.
public retirement, investment trust, I think, and public retirement, investment management or something. Anyway, that was in the memo, so I wanted to speak to it. So I guess, let me tell you where I feel I'm coming down on this right now. I think that, I don't think that we need to take action at fall town meeting. One option could be if we want to take this Medicare D money and make an appropriation into an account that would then have to come back to town meeting to get appropriated again. But that seems like a lot of rigmarole to go through. We just leave it in free cash until the spring. I think in the meantime, we need to have some conversations with the school committee about, are they interested in going down this path with us? If they are, great. If they're not, then we have to make some decisions about our own interest, and I think really think about if we're socking this money away from OPEB, for OPEB, how does that affect how we distribute money between the schools and the town? There's no formal policy here about doing that. It's all kind of based on what people sort of got the year before. I think this is a new wrinkle that deserves more thought. So my recommendation would be to hold off putting any money into the fund until the spring, at which point we may look at the Medicare D money, some of the turnbacks from our unexpended health insurance money from FY11 that's in free cash. At that point, I think we get maybe a better handle on maybe hitting up the enterprise funds, having a comprehensive plan. And then I personally sort of like the incremental $100,000 a year step process. I personally think that politically that's more palatable, but I think that's something that the committee needs to discuss in terms of what you think town meeting would find most palatable. Because at the end of the day, as I concluded in this memo, the most important thing is that this is a complicated issue and we need to have a well thought out plan that town meeting members are going to love. We want them to embrace it. We don't want them to sit there scratching their heads going, what the heck did these crazy finance people just tell us? Because that's really not going to fly. It took Needham 6 years to get from starting the conversation to funding at their full arc. And so I think it's worth it for us to make sure we have the conversation with the different players, particularly the school committee, so that we are coming to town meeting united. So that's where I am feeling these days.
We were just trying to give you something to brag about at the MMA meeting in January. That his town had put in $500,000, but I think you're right about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I was too. I should tell you that when your minutes came out, the draft of last meeting, you had a subcommittee. John Usanti had an instant reaction that was essentially boiled down to, I'd really like to meet with Finance Committee and talk about this, and he had planned to be here tonight. And obviously now the accident is, that changed things, but had it not been for the accident, he would be here right now. I know that he has a lot of strong feelings about it that he would like to express. And as Sandy said, it is really important that we build a community consensus and community understanding for what's a very big and complex issue. And I'm concerned that we haven't taken enough steps yet after we formed the subcommittee and before we got much farther. Sort of was running around through my back of my mind that one thing we could have considered is something we did several years ago on another topic, which is have a well-publicized public hearing. Another was when I read the Brookline Task Force report and thought about your work on the FCCC, the budget choices process, to get a much more focused follow-up community-wide process together to help as the Brookline Task Force did. So that there's several alternatives out there, all which could lead to both better community understanding of a complicated issue that we're just beginning to understand the questions. We haven't gotten to the answers yet. And also to start building some community consensus so that when it gets to town meeting, that it actually has a chance of passing. I think that if we went through, let's put a large money aside, that it would have a significant chance of going nowhere and hurting the understanding of the issue, poisoning the understanding of the issue, and poisoning the support of the committee on other matters, which I don't think we want to do. So I concur with Sandy's overall recommendation. I do think when we get to agenda item 6 under town meeting articles, however, that there is another thing that we could do that might in some ways allow us to talk about this issue some and do something tangible, and that is to move a chunk of money from free cash to stabilization. And to say that we want to do that because we want to make that money harder to touch until we can make a responsible decision about what the long-term needs of this town are, including the OPEB, and then use that as a vehicle.
Sounds sensible to me. How about the other member of the subcommittee?
And I do think that going back to, and I can't speak for John because obviously he can only speak for himself, but from the one conversation, one meeting that I had with him on the topic, where he had asked to come to tonight's meeting, my sense is that he would support that, but I just can't speak for him.
The only point I'll make in our defense is that we made this decision while looking at spreadsheets and not thinking about politics. And so the implications of making a big down payment long term in terms of amortizing that debt are so much greater than the piecemeal process. Now, the piecemeal, it has to meld with politics, understand. So I see where you're coming from, but the big number would help a lot.
Yeah, speaking of that, is this problem of liabilities well understood? I mean, does everybody understand that? In terms of the school committee and the town meeting and the select board and all the various constituencies?
It's getting there.
The town meeting, I think, understands it well enough in that it voted a year ago to establish this trust fund.
Yeah.
So there's a presentation to them. They saw there was a problem and they said, yes, let's set up the fund. And so, at some point the logical next step is to say, you set up the fund, now we're going to put some money into it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what happened.
How and I probably have to study this myself, but how fast is this number growing?
Well,
Like 5 years ago, what was the number? Or maybe I should see something that I haven't seen.
I can email you the actuarial reports.
Okay, that'll be good.
Yeah, I'll do that.
I think the numbers grow so fast and they get so huge that you just look at it and you think, we can't deal with this today, it's too big.
The the OPEB report, there was, as noted earlier, the firm that was hired, there were 3 reports that they did. One was for the Amherst and its elementary schools, one was for Pelham, one was for the region. And they were all delivered to the various committees. And last year at the 4-board meeting, which was in October, as this year's 4-board meeting is, we actually had a report from the actuary who came in and did a very good presentation of what the options might be to deal with it and to help think about it. There were a good number of school committee members there, and so I think that there's some members of the school committee at least who certainly understand it, and I would hope that they all do, but certainly some do.
When you get the report, you can see how much it changed in 2 years.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
And for those watching at home on Amherst Media, these reports are posted documents. I can't easily tell you how to find them. However, people can email the Finance Committee. There's a FinCom at Amherst, ma.gov, and if you send an email to that address, I will receive it, and then I will either send you the link or send you by attachment a copy of the report. So I very much encourage people who are watching at home who are interested in seeing it to understand that it is available. Anything else that we can talk about now on this topic? And if I can, I really appreciate you being here. And it was very helpful to get the understanding of health insurance overlay, the whole plans and the separate pieces, so thank you.
You're welcome.
As far as the reserves, I don't think we want to take the time to discuss that tonight. We are going to have to make sure that we keep working at it. I think that the basic point of the reserves is that historically we've dealt with reserves as saying when times after the recovery from a down cycle, that we try and deliberately put money into reserves, free cash and stabilization, and then have the money to draw back when there's the next down cycle. Given the length of this down cycle and the uncertainties about where the economy is going, I'm not entirely convinced that we can assume an upcycle of a significant nature is coming. Though I certainly hope that there is one. But I do think we have to grapple with the question: is that historical view of what reserves is about still appropriate? And we had set up some very specific purposes that we would consider for reserves a few years ago, when things looked like they were going into a much longer downturn, but we haven't made that a part of our permanent policy. And so those were the 2 elements, I think, that we eventually need to get to in discussing reserves.
One thing I would say is, I was sitting down with Maria the other day getting ready for setting the water and sewer rates and doing our estimates, just trying to figure out where all her spreadsheets are, which there are many. And one thing she showed me is that as a matter of course, in terms of how she's always been instructed to set the water and sewer rates and do the math, is to try to leave $1 million surplus in each of those funds. So even though there's not a formal policy, I think that's been a practice over the years. So I just wanted to share that with you so that you know that at least on an operational basis, something's been happening that way. which I think is a wise thing to do.
Do you know what the surpluses are now for each of the funds, or?
I don't have that report, and I don't know it.
But you could get it for
could
us
get it, yeah.
for a future meeting.
Absolutely.
That will be helpful when we pick up on the discussion of the enterprise funds. Is there other questions, comments on? Okay, then I think we can go ahead and move along to the next item. And for newer members of the committee who don't know the history of how these came about, this is the town financial management policies and objectives. And this is what the document looks like. Most of you have it or should have it. And it is available on the town website under the budget section, and so that people at home can get it. What happened here, and there is an explanation of where the basis for a lot of these policies came from. As you just explained, policies didn't come out of thin air. They came because they were really operating policies, and to some extent, what the Finance Committee did in 2007 to January 2008 was to collect and try and codify either the laws or the operating policies of the town to record the policies. I think that was a greater goal of the committee than trying to create policy. For example, the 5 to 15% reserve policy was not something that we created in 2007. That had been a previous operating policy, but we recorded it. It was adopted by the Finance Committee, and it is a guideline for the town to use. There is one section that the Joint Capital Planning Committee has asked to revise and has already made that revision for its own operational purposes. And so just for the sake of getting it codified into this document, I think we just need to hear the recommendation and act on the recommendation, and I'll turn over to Kate.
I move that the committee amend the financial management policies and objectives for the town of Amherst as follows. That you add to the capital planning section of the policies, add to the end of subsection 4 of subsection A of section C the following phrase: or other items that, combined in purpose, together make it a capital project. Is there a second?
Second.
So, what's this going to, the whole thing, so number 4 is, this is definitions of what constitutes capital project. There are several definitions, and one is major equipment acquisition, replacement, or refurbishment, including but not limited to vehicles, furnishings, and information technology systems, hardware, and software. Then we would add, or other items that, combined in purpose together, make it a capital project. This is what the Joint Capital Planning Committee has done since I've been on it, and before that. An issue came up a couple of years ago about, as I recall, it was audiovisual equipment for the schools, which is one of those recurring items that we always have every year. And somebody said, well, how many projectors is that? Should we make that a capital project or not? And after considerable discussion, the committee voted to add this phrase. I want to also say that the capital planning section of the financial policies and objectives document was written earlier by the Joint Capital Planning Committee. So that's where that section came from.
What is major? What does major mean?
Major equipment acquisition. Well, big stuff. We have a general guideline of anything over $5,000.
They will capitalize everything over $5,000?
It's something that could be considered a capital expenditure. And there are also things that, let me get that section of the document. There's other parts defining capital project is a tangible asset or project with an estimated useful life of 5 years or more and a cost of $5,000 or more. That's the general overall definition.
So both conditions have to be satisfied?
Both conditions, yes.
Yeah, when you look at the whole section together, the $5,000, 5 years is in there.
Yeah, it's right up. He's got it right here.
That's fine, I got it.
And as you pointed out, and as sort of to put my introduction and your report together, Finance Committee in 2007, to concluding in January 2008, did not create all of these policies, as I said, and we took a JCPC policy on capital and incorporated it into the financial management policies and objectives. So it would be a natural thing for us to consider is, since there's now a recommendation, that comes, and that's what your motion is.
Okay, I'll just clarify.
So, any further discussion on the item? All in favor indicate by raising hand. It says 5, that makes it unanimous, so I'll make it 5-0. Which then takes us to Finance Committee articles for the town meeting, get us back to where we were. And as we were going through this, I did realize, Sandy, I did have the memo that we the signing warrant. The meeting is scheduled for October 7 at 8:30 a.m. It is one of those times when the select board schedules a special meeting at a special time for a sole purpose. And they do that from time to time. So that is in fact the date, and that's where my suggestion of the following Thursday that we be prepared to hear presentations on some of these warrant articles, which would then be a published warrant we can proceed with.
So that following Thursday meeting is the one where we're doing the presentation of the financial indicators.
Correct.
And I just wanted to touch base with you at some point about how long you think that will take, and is there likely to be a lot of discussion at that meeting, so we'll take up other items that night, or?
We do take up other items. We did do that for the last several years, where we continue to meet after the meeting. And in the last meeting that I had with John that I referred to earlier, I worked it out so that our meeting will continue in the town room, so that after the 4 board meetings, the other 3 boards adjourn to conclude the 4 board meeting, we can continue to meet in the town room. We don't have to move to any other location or any other building. So that's taken care of. And the preliminary warrant list, and this is preliminary because not all things were there, but I did note several items that are of interest to the committee, and I'll just tick through them real quickly as to what they are. One is transfer funds for Medicare Part D, which you touched on earlier, Sandy, in your discussion, and Kate touched on. The question for the committee is, do we want to request wording that instead of having the money as it has for the past several years be transferred from free cash to the Health Claims Trust Fund, be either that we dismiss the article or that it be transferred somewhere else. We could just dismiss the article and then not have to worry about the transfer at this town meeting.
Well, that would be my recommendation. Again, I think it would save some steps. We can just as easily do this at the spring town meeting, and the money will still be there, and I don't think there's any problem doing that.
Yeah, we don't even have to dismiss an article because it hasn't been created yet.
Right.
It would be a question of my communicating a desire from the Finance Committee that it not be an article.
It's incredibly efficient.
Is that the consensus of the committee, that we just not request an article on Medicare this year? Seems sort of negative to make it a motion to not do something.
We haven't made it a motion to do it yet.
That's right.
So,
Just pretend it never happened.
I will, what happened is that there was a request for a tentative list of articles. And we will have a meeting in which I participate with the Finance Committee, and the meeting consists, it's a town manager, it's a town moderators meeting actually. It consists of the town council, the Sandy, John, chair of the select board, chair of the Finance Committee, and somebody from town meeting coordinating committee. I think those are the principal participants. And so what currently exists is just a list of possibilities for that group to discuss. But we can easily remove anything from it. Transfer of funds to stabilization was an item that was placed there following Sandy and my discussion. So that one we now had talked about earlier. So I think that the question is, do we want to put a specific amount in, or do we just want to have a general item to transfer a sum of money? And I think we can do it either way.
One thing I might recommend is I think Sonia's gone ahead and filed a request for a free cash certification, which will be different from this 1.1 million. Once we get that back, I'd be happy to make a recommendation to the committee for a number, once we know exactly how much our free cash is. Unless the committee has a strong feeling about a range you'd like to go with tonight, but I think we have enough time between now and town meeting to recommend a sum and then come up, a sum of money, and then come up with a specific number to fill in for that sum.
Yeah, I'm assuming the town council and the moderator will agree with that approach, and not request a specific sum, because there are other articles every year of that nature. And if we did that, we would have time then to get that recommendation. There are some policy factors we'd want to consider. The policies that I just held up earlier and that we just amended for a very specific purpose say that it is the goal to have reserves, free cash and stabilization between 5 and 15%. And it says something to the effect that the town may consider transferring anything in excess of 5% to stabilization. And right now, when I did a rough calculation, and I reserve the right to be wrong because after all, who am I? I got about $1.5 million is the amount that we're above 5% right now. And so you could either go with some number that gets you using the 5%, and then there's the other question is we have that additional chunk that you guys had identified. It was the one-time money that came this year only. And should we say that that was one-time money this year only, and it ought to take 2/3 to make a decision on how to spend it, and we would make that recommendation. So we can talk about that later, those two things later.
Right, I also frankly think part of it's gonna have to do with those other items I talked about before, the pool and puffers, whether we're gonna go forward with those, in which case we have to reserve some of that free cash for those purposes.
Correct. So we'll leave it as a general item. The third one that I have highlighted off this list is funding of OPEB. I think that based on tonight's discussion, we're just going to suggest that one not stay in the list of potential articles. Capital for War Memorial Pool, capital for Puffers Pond Park Match. The current wording for those next two items, and it is not our habit in the Finance Committee to act on that until we've heard from JCPC. So, and they would hear from staff. So I don't think we can do more right now. So I'm just doing this for information purposes. Another capital item is capital for emergency generator for town hall, and a sum of money for the Gateway project, which is probably not capital money.
Yeah, I don't think that's capital, it's just, it would need to be an appropriation for some of the studies. So it's a financial item.
And that we will have to get a recommendation on. And I don't know if Mr. Zomack, as acting town manager, is going ahead with a recommendation. I know that John Santi had been working on this because he's the one who told me about it initially.
Yeah, we've been trying to reach out to Jonathan Tucker to get some background on this and what exactly the dollar amounts are. But it's one of those projects that John Santi had been really taking the lead on, so we're trying to figure out what, I don't know yet exactly what the scope is of these things, but we will be coming to the Finance Committee with more specific recommendations.
And there was a fairly broad dollar range thrown out at one point. I don't know if that's still a reasonable dollar range. The authorization for borrowing for sewer project is a DPW issue, and whether that's going to come forward, I guess, needs to be decided upon yet.
That's under active discussion at this point. But I think the likelihood is that something will move forward on that. This is for two projects, Wildflower and Hardwick Road, maybe? The border between Pelham and Amherst.
Oh,
Harkness, thank you.
And the last one is water comes for water meters, which is another one that would come through DPW.
And I think the watershed lane purchase is a financial item too.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
There is one other item, the treasurer collector will come forward with, to accept a general law changing the rules on tailings, which are the old checks that we write and that nobody cashes, and right now we have to wait 3 years to take the money back, and the new law allows us to only wait a year. So she's going to recommend that. I don't know if that would come before finance as for a recommendation, because it has to do with our policies on how we bring in money, or that just goes straight to select board or what. But I just wanted to point it out and let you know what that was about.
A lot of these, just as a matter of course, so as you asked a question, there are other new members of the committee here, there's new. Some of these items will come because they come through the town manager to the select board, and then we get consulted because we review every item on the warrant to see if it has a financial consequence, and if so, whether we recommend it or don't recommend it. So we review every warrant article. Some of them end up being finance committee articles, and some of them end up being articles of the select board, and that's usually something that would be determined at that meeting with that I described earlier, that the moderator chairs, and we decide what will be finance committee articles at that time.
I'm sorry I came late. I'm sorry I have to leave early. I'm going to give Kay my proxy to vote for the minutes because she's the keeper of those minutes. And I need to know when our next meeting is.
Okay. Actually, there's one thing, since you're mentioning minutes, maybe I should take this out of order. Kay said that there's only one set of minutes that needs to be approved, and that's subcommittee minutes. And since you remember the subcommittee, well, I don't think we have them.
We don't have those.
No, you don't have them.
So we therefore aren't considering them. So the only thing is whether the two of you, as members of the subcommittee, and you have to do this because it wouldn't be a quorum of the subcommittee without you, want to approve those minutes.
Minutes of August 24th, 2011, which I sent to you.
Oh,
And everybody else.
I move we approve.
Second.
All in favor?
And the two of you have concurred by your moving and seconding, and the minute taker will figure out how to duly note that. Just to go through what's left on the agenda, because I really think we are about to adjourn anyway. But I know you have to go, and you said that, so we're only going to be a minute or a few minutes after you go, because I don't think there are going to be many liaison reports, and we're pretty much done with item 6, and there are no minutes to approve.
Are we done with item 6?
No, we're going to come back to that. We haven't
Okay.
closed that one out. I just want to get to the next meetings and answer that question so that obvious leaves it's been answered. I sent out an email and I said that I had reserved 4 meetings, October 13th and 20th, November 3rd and 10th, and those still are the next meetings. Okay.
I just want to point out that in the schedule, the first packet and mailing to town meeting members goes out on Friday the 14th, which is the day after our next meeting.
First packet.
The first packet. There's no date in here for the second packet, which is when we need to have our report ready.
Yeah, no, I knew the mailing of the second packet is October 26th. And
so we're going to have to take all of our positions.
On those first two meetings that I just told you about.
Yeah.
And I was actually going to say that to explain something else to you, we've just talked about all of the ones where we think that there are financial consequences. There are actually on the list only 7 additional items. Authorization for solar at additional municipal sites.
I think that will be pulled.
Authorization for affordable housing restriction for Olympia Drive units with CDBG funding. Watershed land purchase, you mentioned already. Authority for easements for Pelham Road Bridge project, which is a DPW item. Those easements kinds of things are usually fairly straightforward. Authority for temporary easements, Snell Street Bridge project, street acceptance, Sunrise Avenue. Street acceptances are usually pretty fast. There's one zoning amendment, form-based zoning, and that's a big zoning issue. but it's the only zoning issue that's on there. And the last one, and I actually can give you copies of this, is the Committee for Homelessness has this resolution that they're bringing forward, and it's written as a resolution and not a bylaw. So I'm not sure what the effect would be of it if it comes out in the present, in the format where it's drafted right now. And of course, this is not official because it, you know, it hasn't gotten to the point of being on the warrant yet. But it would urge creation of a permanent committee, and I only bring that to our attention because we had raised an issue last year about wanting to make sure that the financial consequences for staff time and other support needs, the creations of committees, be considered before committees are created. And so I note that. It does not look like a huge warrant. And so I'm not sure that we can't do it in 2 nights worth of meetings. But we would have to stay after and continue meeting after and we did this last year, after the 4-board meeting, we focused only on town meeting warrant articles and not have any further discussion of the projections and hold just that until we get to a separate meeting to discuss the guidelines.
The only thing I would say is I don't know that the select board is going to be ready with the sewer extension project recommendation by the 13th. I think they may be taking that up on the 17th.
Except they'll have voted whether to put it on the warrant before then.
Yes, but they have to decide things like whether to include this in the rates or use betterments as a funding source.
We could wait to hear that one until the 20th because we're not going to hear them all on the 13th. I think what we want to do is make the best use of time on the 13th and then pick up the rest on the 20th.
Right.
So
okay.
That is where we are. Any questions or comments about that? Hearing none. Any member reports, any liaisons or committee meetings in the report?
Nope, we heard all about JCPC.
Okay. Liaisons usually don't meet, don't get involved until budget time because, you know, that's what we're really all about.
Are you going to mention that you asked me to be a liaison to the library?
Yes, and the committee actually asked you at the last meeting when you were out in California.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I never saw the minutes. Well, I guess
That's
maybe yes.
It's all part of the plan.
But anyway, Janice has indicated that she's willing to do it, so our request was accepted. Thank you. And so I think that's it, unless there's other topics that I didn't reasonably anticipate that you can think of. Okay.
Is it in order to move to adjourn?
That would be in order. And the meeting is adjourned at 10 minutes after 9. And